Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I extend a very warm welcome to the distinguished delegation that has come here in a fantastic size, which I, in 30 years in the UN system, have never seen, that up to 40 members have come. The normal size of delegations is about 6 or 7 if it's just one of the two committees. Multiply that by 2, about 14 or 15 for the others. So I take this as a sign how serious you take human rights in your country, and that apart from the dialogue that we are going to engage in this afternoon, you are deeply interested to spread the knowledge through all the departments of the government, which I appreciate very, very much. Before giving the floor to the head of the delegation, the Vice Minister, Mr. Chen Mingtang, to make the opening statement of about 15 minutes. We will then proceed that then my colleague, Mr. Nowak, will say a few words, and then we will ask Theo van Boven to ask the first question. He has about 4 or 5 questions, and we just decided that it would be better for you that we deal with them one by one. But during the afternoon, we may find that that is too generous, and then we might run out of important questions. So if we get into time difficulties, you will, I hope, permit me to structure it a bit and then say, well, take 2 or 3 questions together for you to answer. And perhaps we have been provided with an excellent list of all the people who are involved in the system. It's just staggering. I'm really, really very, very impressed. And the way you have handled it, also the Ministry of Justice, your efforts to, in collaboration with all the other departments, you have seen to it that everyone has a chance to say something and to bring their views into the process, so that we can have a really good constructive dialogue. And that brings me to the purpose of this function. It's a dialogue between the committee, the 2 committees, and the government delegation. But we also have listened to non-governmental organizations. We will do this again this evening and tomorrow morning for an hour, and on Wednesday morning. But that's a separate issue. Of course, you are perfectly entitled to send ministry officials to listen to what the NGOs are saying, and then perhaps comment on it in your responses to questions from the committee. But in fact, the dialogue is between us, sitting here, and you. I think this is in the best interest of everyone. And I will then just say that I would like to thank Ming Li Kuo and his team. It's a big team who have made it so much easier for us. We couldn't have done our preparation without his wonderful thing, even over the Lunar Year festivals, which I know is holy for Asian families. So thank you once again. And I would also like, I forgot to do that this morning, I'd also like to thank the 2 interpreters sitting in the box who are doing a great job. And on the issue with the NGOs this morning, we had even a sign language interpreter, which was done incredibly, and we've got another one. This shows how serious you are taking it all. Enough said. I will now hand the floor to my colleague Manfred, and we co-share.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. I would like also to express my deep conviction that this is a historical moment, I would say. It's an exceptional case that Taiwan, which is not a member state of the United Nations, has taken the effort of ratifying the 2 most important treaties, human rights treaties of the United Nations, in addition to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and also implementing them by a special implementation act to transfer all the different human rights and corresponding obligations into the domestic legal system of Taiwan. But secondly also, since you cannot avail yourself of the normal treaty monitoring which is offered by the United Nations, that you have taken the effort of inviting us, 10 human rights experts who are very much familiar with the various United Nations human rights procedures, to come to Taiwan for a full week in order to discuss with you. And that means, of course, as Eibe Riedel has said, first of all, it's a state reporting procedure, so we are primarily dealing with governmental representatives to see what you have done in order to implement both covenants, but also to have a frank dialogue on where do you see shortcomings, problems that still need to be addressed. And at the same time, we were extremely impressed by the interest of a very vibrant civil society, and many non-governmental organizations have provided us with their shadow reports and plenty of additional information in order to enable us, who are, if I may say, with the exception of Jerry Cohen, not real specialists on the human rights situation in Taiwan. We are general human rights experts, to enable us to familiarize ourselves with the various legal and factual problems in order at the end to provide you with an objective assessment of what we feel have been the achievements of the government of Taiwan to implement these international human rights, but also to point out certain shortcomings, problems that we feel in our concluding observations. And we hope that this dialogue will continue then with the follow-up as it is practiced by the standing treaty bodies in Geneva in relation to all the other states. So in that sense, I'm extremely happy that there is such a big and representative governmental delegation. I also understand that there are a few human rights NGO representatives here in the room, but others will follow our discussions via webcasting in other rooms, so that there is the publicity which we are also used from the United Nations, where all these state report review meetings are conducted in public. And I would also like to add to what Eibe Riedel has said, my most sincere gratitude to Mingil Kuo for all the work that he has done. He was always available for us in the last months, for answering our questions, for facilitating our requests, on the one hand with the government, on the other hand with the NGO community, and who did a marvelous job in organizing all that, including picking us up individually from the airport yesterday and the day before. And today, yeah, because Eibe Riedel only arrived this morning. So if he is starting to sleep, I will take over the chair from him. But we have said we have a division of labor, and so he will be primarily in charge of chairing this meeting with you.
Okay. Thanks, Manfred. And without further ado, I now give the floor to the head of the delegation to briefly introduce the delegation and to make the opening statement. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairperson, distinguished experts, first of all, on behalf of the Minister of Justice, Zeng, I would like to extend my heartfelt welcome to all of you. Minister Zeng is unable to be here in person. I'm here on his behalf. I'm the Deputy Minister of Justice. I am also a member of the Human Rights Task Force in the Presidential Office. First of all, allow me to extend my appreciation to you as you have made tremendous efforts to implement the two covenants in different parts of the world. And in particular, I thank you for coming all the way from your country to join us here in Taiwan, serve as members of the review committee. I know that you have performed a review of our national report with a review procedure like the one adopted in the United Nations. Taiwan, as you said, is not a member of the United Nations, nor are we a signatory to the two covenants as recognized by the UN. And your presence here is a testament to your support to human rights protection. I believe this review meeting is going to be an important milestone in the history of human rights development in the world. On October 5th, 1967, the ROC's government signed the two covenants, which said much about our support of human rights. However, in 1971, Taiwan withdrew from the United Nations. We, as a result, have not been able to take part in international human rights activities effectively. But thanks to the joint effort made by the people and government of Taiwan, we have made progress in human rights promotion. And I think this meeting today is another demonstration of our efforts and commitment. So, Mr. Chairperson, I think it is clear that Taiwan is willing to comply with the international human rights standard. And we have been aspiring to promote human rights in our country by judging our performance against the international human rights standards. In fact, since the year 2000, we began reviewing and amending existing regulations and laws in accordance with the provisions of the two covenants. In other words, before we incorporated these two covenants into our domestic laws, we already began amending laws as necessary. Since President Ma took office in 2008, the government made even more efforts in incorporating the two covenants in domestic laws. So in March 2009, the Legislative Yuan in Taiwan passed the implementation acts of the two covenants. The two acts were promulgated in April by the President and came into force in December of the same year. The President ratified the two covenants. However, the instruments of ratification was not accepted by the United Nations for deposits. It is very regrettable. However, we did not stop our efforts to incorporate the two covenants into our domestic laws. For example, the implementation acts have made it clear that the provisions regarding human rights protection in the two covenants will be valid and have legal binding force as domestic laws. Moreover, we would reference the general comments of the two covenants. And we also have produced the translation of the two covenants in the traditional Chinese characters so that everyone in government can have a clear understanding of the two covenants. Moreover, we have recruited you, a panel of experts, to help us review our national reports. And of course, when it comes to existing administrative measures and laws, we want to make sure that they are aligned with the provisions of the two covenants. So we have now completed the initial report, which took us about 1 year to complete. During the process, we not only consulted independent human rights experts, but also representatives from government agencies and NGOs. In April 2012, we completed and published the report. President Ma actually presided over the press conference for this initial report. The English version of the report was also published, and the press conference was again presided over by President Ma. I think that again is a gesture of the government to show peoples of the Republic of China and the rest of the world that we are committed to protecting human rights. So I would like to use this opportunity to thank members of the Presidential Human Rights Advisory Committee, independent human rights experts, and NGO representatives for their contribution and participation in drafting the report. We listened to their advice, criticisms, and suggestions. We actually incorporated a lot of the criticisms into the national report. So allow me to extend my appreciation and admiration to all the participants throughout the process. Based on your concluding observations, we will soon establish a mechanism of improving and monitoring human rights protection. We will also produce follow-up reports and periodic reports so as to ensure that our people enjoy the rights as enshrined in the two covenants. There's no denying that Taiwan, because of its own unique culture and values, may not have done a good job in ensuring human rights. So we need to spend more time and effort coordinating with parties related and concerned. That's why progress in human rights protection cannot be attained overnight. It takes time. It takes time to take baby steps to attain our ultimate goal. And we rely on you for concrete advice for attaining that goal. Moreover, for years, Taiwan is unable to take part in human rights activities under the aegis of the United Nations. So we do not have sufficient experience learning from our counterparts in other countries. This is a predicament we face in the international community. I hope you will help Taiwan, the government and people, to exchange with experts on human rights issues in different countries. Mr. Chairperson and distinguished experts, let me reaffirm our commitment and resolution to protect and safeguard human rights. We are also aware of the challenges lying ahead. We humbly look forward to your advice. I wish you good health and happiness. Thank you. Now, allow me to introduce representatives from different government agencies. Some from the Council of Labor Affairs, the Ministry of the Interior, the Control Yuan, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, the Council of Indigenous Peoples, the Ministry of Education, Department of Health. Okay, this one is from the Council of Agricultural Affairs, Environmental Protection Administration. Administration of Transportation and Communication, the Ministry of Culture, the Examination Yuan, the Council of Mainland Affairs, the Council for Economic Planning and Development, Ministry of National Defense, Central Electoral Committee, Personnel Affairs Department, Financial Supervisory Commission, Council on Research and Evaluation, the Commission for Veterans, National Communications Commission, the Judicial Yuan. Representatives from the Ministry of Education. Who else? The Department of Gender Equality of the Executive Yuan. So that's all. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for this really succinct introduction of your huge delegation. We are really impressed. Thank you very much. I now hand the floor straight away to my colleague, Theo van Boven, to ask the first question on the Common Core document.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, it is a great pleasure and privilege to meet you all. And yesterday night, President Ma set the tone, and we are sitting in that same spirit here. In fact, the President, when the delegation was presented to us, it shows, in fact, how many areas of government are involved and how broad the scope of human rights is really being. It affects nearly every part of the government activities. And also this morning when we listened to representatives of Parliament and of non-governmental organizations, again, this broad scope of human rights was very much present here. Now, I will put a number of issues before you relating to the core document as it is on our agenda. The core document, which and this is true for all the government documents presented by the government, is very informative, and I have been learning because, as was said by the chair or the co-chair this morning or this afternoon, we are more generalist about human rights, but not specialist on Taiwan. So I'm learning a great deal about Taiwan, but I hope that from our general expertise we can also give some advice and guidance. Now, I will raise 5 issues with you, and they are related to the core document. Not all are being treated in detail or not at all in the core document, but I think they are core issues. Of course, the core document also treats a number of issues relating to specific articles of the covenants. So they will be raised in due course when we come to those articles. So my presentation or my questions are more of a general nature. They are the following 5 issues. And as the chair already announced, we will treat them one by one, so that you, as delegation, have the opportunity to go into every issue after each other and not just all lumped together. Now, the following issues are on my agenda here with you. The issue of national institutions for the promotion and protection of human rights. That's the first one, which came up also this morning. In fact, I have to say that by some of the organizations. The ratification and implementation of international human rights documents. of the United Nations. Perhaps you could also include, but we are not going to that, if the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and there are other specialized agencies, also raised this morning. The third issue I would like to discuss with you is the Implementation Act relating to the international covenants. And the fourth issue is on corporate responsibility. And the fifth one is on transitional justice, truth and reconciliation, including reparation for political victims and their relatives. So these are the 5 issues I would like to raise with you within the limited time that is available. Now, coming to the first issue, that is on the national institutions for the promotion and protection of human rights. Of course, we, having been dealing, as we are sitting here with, on the international level of review and monitoring, what is basic, in fact, is what's happening at the national level. That is, I think, always these international treaties and conventions, they are, in fact, drawn up not for the higher echelons in the United Nations, but they are drawn up to be implemented locally and domestically in the various countries. Now, coming to this issue of national institutions, of course, there are already in existence many branches of government that deal directly or indirectly with the realization of human rights. The executive one, the legislative one, the judicial one, the control one, and so on. They have distinct functions, but also, I would say, as you are sitting here, a joint responsibility. It may also be argued that the control one, with its Human Rights Protection Committee, could suitably serve as the national institution. But up till now, it appears, but I say that with a certain modesty, but it appears that its functions of protecting human rights are rather limited and not very significant, and also the question of its independence may be a matter to be looked into. But in fact, proposals to set up a national independent human rights institutions are on the table for more than 15 years. More recently, the Presidential Advisory Committee on Human Rights proposed the creation of a task force to study and plan a national human rights institution. Now, I looked at the terms of reference of such a task force, and it appears to me that it is a rather bureaucratic outfit, which may well turn out to be a device to put the proposal of a national independent human rights institution to sleep for good, to sleep for good. And it's our considered opinion that Taiwan should follow the example of many nations, including a number of them in the region of Southeast Asia, to establish a national human rights commission or institution that is in full compliance with the United Nations Paris principles for the promoting and protection of human rights, also with guarantees of independence when it comes to appointing members and also funding of such an institution. Such an institution may well play an important role to promote advice and encourage and investigate compliance with international standards, and may have good potentials for cooperation and exchange with sister organizations in the region. And as far as functions of such an institution are concerned, I would also refer to General Comment number 10 of the Committee on Economic and Social Rights, and the general comment that deals with the role of national human rights institutions for the protection of economic, social, and cultural rights. So this is the first issue I would like to raise.
Who would like to answer? Who would like to answer on behalf of the delegation?
Allow me to invite Director Peng from the Department of Legal System at MOJ to respond, and maybe other representatives can respond later. Mr. Chairman and committee members, it is our long-term goal to establish national human rights institutions, and when we ratify the two covenants, the MOJ has the mandate to do research on whether we should establish such an institution as the Executive Yuan, the Control Yuan, or the Ministry of Justice. There were some debates, and in the end, the Presidential Office decided to set up an advisory committee first. And the advisory committee then decided to establish a task force to do research. And the MOJ is the staff unit of this research and planning task force to establish a national human rights institution. But the establishment involves the revision of laws and regulations, and even the constitution. So there is a great deal to be discussed before we can establish such an institution. And after this task force finishes the study, it will raise a proposal to the advisory committee in the presidential office as an advice to be submitted to the president. So our plan is to finish the research and planning in the next 6 months. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of committee, I'm the representative of Control Yuan. My name is Michael Lin. You know, in this country, we implement a very unique checks and balances system in central Taiwan, central government. Besides the executive branch, legislative branch, and the judicial branch, we have another 2 branches, namely control branch and the examination branch. We adopt the control system from ancient China, which has been implemented about 2,000 years ago. The purpose of setting up Control Yuan is in search of anti-corruption and transparency or investigation into more administration, actually. But actually, we are Ombudsman Office because we joined International Ombudsman Office in 1994. We are former members. But compared with most the Ombudsman Office in the world, we are more powerful because we are empowered by the Constitution in this country to make investigation, to impeach the high-ranking official, to censure the government official if they violate the law severely. We also can make a recommendation to any government agencies if they did something wrong. Although in the law or in the Constitution, there's no any provisions that the Control Yuan can do something regarding the human rights protection. But in practice, because every year we investigate many cases, average we finish about 500 investigation reports, and we found that more than 50% of those investigations actually are related to human rights. So actually we have performed some important function in protecting human rights. But in terms of law, we still have some problem. We still have some limited because we only can investigate human rights abuse caused by government agency, not by the private, because we are the Ombudsman Office. but we are quite independent. We are independent from another 4 yuans. We take open-minded attitude towards the issues. If the general public can reach the consensus, if the whole country can reach any conclusion, we accept that because we are open-minded. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me just add a very small question related to that. There is, of course, and from the written material, we got a lot of information of punctual issues being dealt with in various institutions. But there is not one comprehensive set of rules dealing with them all. And my question is, one can always say, well, we'll set up a task force or we set up a committee, and that means we have gained 20 years before they come out with something. It's another way of saying we're not doing anything. I'm being really outspoken, so I'd like your answer, what your intention is in this respect as far as the National Human Rights Institution is concerned.
And also, how does it violate the Constitution? I mean, it may not have a constitutional guarantee or a backing, but surely the Constitution does not forbid the government from setting up a human rights institution without having a constitutional backing. If you can have other institutions, this would be one of them.
Let me add something. Well, of course, the establishment is not constitutional. I think the problem is where we should locate such an institution. There are 5 branches of the government under the president in Taiwan. So in most countries, there are 3 branches, but we have 5 branches. They are the Executive Yuan, the Legislative Yuan, the Control Yuan, the Examination Yuan, and the Judicial Yuan. And there are other agencies under these 5 branches. There is a largest number of subordinate agencies under the Executive Yuan. And now we are in the process of some reshuffling or a reorganization of the Executive Yuan. And so the problem right now is where we should put this institution. Should we put it under the presidential office? Should we put it under one of the 5 branches in the government? Now, the presidential office has an advisory committee on human rights. So the presidential office can coordinate the 5 branches so that it does not intervene with the tasks of the 5 branches. And under the Executive Yuan, there is a group for promotion and protection of human rights. And it is presided over by the premier. So how do we coordinate different task forces? How do we establish a national overseeing institution? It's going to take some more discussions, and as one of our delegates says that the planning and research will be finished in the next 6 months, and we will generate some conclusions by then.
According to the Paris principles, the 2 most important criteria for a national human rights institution is independence and pluralism. Independence also means it has to be established by a legislative act or by an amendment of the Constitution. So it is established by a legislative act, but it should be fully independent from the government. It should be in between the government on the one hand and civil society on the other, and it would also have a clearinghouse function between international human rights standards and domestic standards. But it should not be a judicial institution. So it should not be related to the courts, but a non-judicial institution. So usually, since it is established by a constitutional or legislative act, in most countries, a national human rights commission, which is envisaged for the region because most other states in the Asia-Pacific region have followed the model of a national human rights commission, should then be responsible to Parliament, the legislative yuan. So I think to be most in line with the Paris principles, I think if it would be directly under the executive yuan or under the president, then it would probably not fulfill the very important requirement of being fully independent from the executive branch.
Thank you. I directly give the floor to Heisoo Shin because it's on exactly the same issue. Okay. Before
Yes.
giving the floor to you.
I was happy to hear that you will take 6 months, and I hope that it doesn't go beyond 6 months. And in your study, I hope that you will also take into account the experience of Korea. I served as a commissioner of Korean National Human Rights Commission. And in our National Human Rights Commission Act, which was adopted by the legislature back in 2000, we have independent human rights commission which does not belong to any executive, legislative, or judicial branch of the government. It is independent, so it doesn't belong to any branches of the government. So you need some creative ideas. We didn't go through constitutional reform, although we wanted to, but since it takes very long time to amend constitution, so we just made this act, but created the Human Rights Commission. And it is very important in the protection and promotion of human rights to have independent human rights institution, such as Human Rights Commission, because then people are free to file complaints, to appeal for human rights violations and discriminations, which is completely different from the fact that you have control yuan. You might have powerful control yuan, but it is different that people feel friendly enough to bring their cases of complaint so that it can really function the role of protecting and promoting human rights. So I strongly recommend that you take examples of other countries, especially in Asia and Pacific, regarding how to establish a National Human Rights Commission. Thank you.
I give the floor back to the delegation.
Thank you. In terms of pluralism and independence and the Korean experience, in fact, I believe my colleagues have collected information and data in this regard. I'm sure my colleagues will do their best in accelerating the pace of work. And of course, if you can point out a clear direction in which we should work on, we would appreciate that much. We would like to learn from different countries' experiences, and we will certainly report to our supervisors and work with our colleagues.
Quite well the first question on the National Human Rights Institution, and I will hand back to Theo van Boven on the ratification of international human rights document, the second issue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, we have to go through a large number of issues. It would be tempting to continue discussing the National Human Rights Commission because it is an important issue and a great deal of interest is invested in this issue. In fact, I would just one word I would advise the task force also to consult closely the Paris principles in their work. I think they were mentioned also by Manfred Nowak, and I think they are extremely important in devising and setting up such a national commission. Now I come to the second issue, that is the ratification and implementation of human rights instruments. Of course, we greatly welcome, and this whole meeting of review is devoted to that Taiwan has ratified the international covenants, and already before the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination against Women, CEDAW. These are very important steps, and we welcome that. In fact, also, at the time when the ROC was still a member of the United Nations, at that time in 1970 already the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination was already ratified. Now there are a number of other core instruments of the United Nations, and I find out a following pattern in the answers of the government on the following issues. There is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We were informed that no immediate intention is to sign or ratify, but that Taiwan is acting in the spirit of this convention. Now I'm wondering, what is that? What does it mean? In the spirit of this convention, of course, a spirit is fine and sympathetic, but not a legal undertaking. And then I was somewhat surprised by the answer of the government on the Convention Against Torture. It was stated, if I may say so in simple terms, that Taiwan does not fully endorse that instrument, but law and practice to prevent and combat torture and cruel, inhuman treatment or punishment is supposed to be adequate. It's supposed to be adequate. Of course, this issue will certainly be further discussed in relation to Article 7 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but I note with regret, I think, that there is no intention for the time being, to ratify the Convention Against Torture. Then we have two other conventions, one on the migrant workers, a very important one also in the context of this country, and also on enforced disappearances. And we were informed that the relevant conventions are under consideration under the conclusion, I've quote, under the conclusion of Treaties Act and the Provisional Act governing the incorporation of multilateral conventions into domestic law. A task force, again a task force, a task force is dealing with this matter in its review activities. And then we have also, and this morning we met with representatives from groups of people with disabilities, and they very strongly pressed that Taiwan would also ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that it would ratify it in the near future. But we were informed by the government that Taiwan prefers to implement the People's Act, the People with Disabilities Right to Protection Act, rather than to ratify this convention. Now, the arguments put forward not to ratify for the time being these 5 instruments are, in my view, not convincing. One argument is that Taiwan is not a member of the United Nations, but this argument apparently did not count in ratifying the CEDAW and the international covenants. The other argument is that domestic laws and practice are already fully adequate and in compliance with these texts. This may be true, but this is no reason not to use these treaties as a yardstick to measure domestic law and practice against international agreed standards. It will strengthen the reputation of Taiwan as belonging to the global human rights movement also to ratify these instruments. And in fact, the observance and the value of human rights in a larger sense was also very much and eloquently underlined yesterday night by President Ma. I think it would be to speak about spirit, to act in that spirit also to ratify these core instruments of the United Nations. Thank you.
With your permission, I would just like to add one point so that we don't go at loggerheads on the issue of signature and ratification at international law. You have signed the two covenants, but not ratified. You wanted to ratify, but you couldn't, for reasons which we all know. But the Implementation Act to the covenants, there's nothing to stop you from ratifying it at the internal level and making it lock, stock, and barrel part of Taiwan legislation. Do you share that view? And this goes for CRPD, CRC, CAT, CED, and the Migrant Workers Convention. The Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights has done a number of general comments relating to these issues, and to the extent that their interpretations of the social covenant, it's already part of your international obligations. So it's really easy for you to take on board what is in the international treaties, which for some reason or other you cannot ratify internationally. But you could apply those norms as interpretation aids, supplementing the general comments of the committees, and things. So I'd like to know what your view is. The Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I believe, are called on that.